Okay, well, it's Tuesday. It's Tuesday Trauma Tips, and I'm Janet Rhodes. I've been gone for the last couple weeks. I was involved in a moved from Alberta back to my home province of Saskatchewan. So I'm happy to be home and back in my familiar surroundings. So thank you for joining and for watching this video if you're watching it taped later on. If you're not sure who I am a trauma healing coach. This is my business, Roads to Wellness Coaching, and every Tuesday I share different trauma tips just to help people in their healing journey and little things that they can take in their life, whether it's their own journey or whether they're walking beside somebody else who is healing from trauma. Today is more of an awareness than anything else, and specifically about domestic abuse survivors. Domestic abuse is something that happens within our society. 1 in 3 women will find that they are a victim of domestic abuse in their lifetime. So it happens a lot more, I think, than many people realize. Myself, I am a survivor of domestic abuse. My first marriage was very violent, especially near the end, which is typical for abusive relationships. And I now work with abuse survivors as they recover from their trauma, whether they're still in the relationship or they have left and are on that recovery journey. Having a good support system is paramount for that, so I walk with them on that journey. But today what I'm going to speak about is something called TBIs, also known as traumatic brain injuries. And you may have heard about traumatic brain injuries. Commonly they're talked about with football players or soldiers when they take a hit to the head and they suffer some sort of a brain injury. And it's very common in that sport and plus in the job of being a soldier. But those people have something that a domestic abuse survivor who also can suffer, I'll go into those stats, but can suffer a traumatic brain injury in their relationship. The football player and the soldiers have something that abuse survivors do not. They have equipment. They have a helmet on their head. They have immediate medical assistance. So there are medics that come running onto the field, whether it's a football field or whether it's during a war. And they receive treatment and they're given time off and they're able to rest and they're able to heal. A domestic abuse survivor isn't always or nearly as lucky as that. They do not have that equipment. They're not wearing a helmet, nor do many of them even seek medical treatment. A lot of that is due to shame because they don't want to admit that this is happening within their relationship. Also, it can be due to memory loss. When an abuser hits their partner, most abusers will hit in an area on the body that is either not seen or also if it is a hit to the head, it is to the forehead, which is where your prefrontal cortex is and where your memory is stored. And so often there can be memory loss and the survivor may not remember what has happened to them or that they've even suffered this head injury and be able to therefore seek medical treatment. So what is a TBI? So a TBI is anything that disrupts the normal function of the brain. It is a blow to the head, whether it's something hitting the head, whether it's falling, hitting the head, and it can also be when something impales into the head as well, through the skull. A concussion, which you may be familiar with, is a form of a TBI. They aren't detectable in scans, so that's kind of something that makes them tricky. They're not detectable in X-rays, they're not detectable in MRIs, because what happens is you have your brain, which is floating in fluid within your skull, and you have the blow to the head, and the fibers are what gets broken, and that causes the TBI or the concussion, and you can't see that on an X-ray or in an MRI. So there isn't that physical evidence for a doctor to diagnose, but it's still important to seek that treatment because they can see it in other ways with your symptoms. Also, they can do tests with light and see what's happening with your eyes, which can indicate that you're suffering a concussion. So 75% of domestic violence survivors actually do suffer a TBI at some point within their relationship. A lot of them, it happens if they are being strangled, which happens quite a bit actually in domestic abuse relationships. And 90% of those that suffer strangulation also during that suffer a TBI. Now, it's not the lack of oxygen that causes this TBI. A lack of oxygen to the brain, yes, that is damaging, but that's not a TBI. A TBI has to be where the head is struck in some way, which causes that damage. So signs and symptoms that can come up if you have suffered a TBI, or you are concerned about somebody that you know. Maybe they're not thinking straight, maybe they're complaining of these symptoms, and you can urge them to seek medical treatment. And I would even encourage you to go with them. Sometimes a domestic abuse survivor does need help advocating for themselves. Through the abuse of their relationship, their self-esteem and their self-worth has become so battered that they don't speak up for themselves, even with doctors or anybody in a position of authority. So if you do have somebody that you're suspecting, you may want to go with them to the appointment to make sure that they receive the best care. But signs and symptoms that may show that somebody has suffered a TBI would be complaining of frequent headaches, changes to their vision, dizziness and balance issues. So perhaps they're complaining that they keep falling all the time, or they are, and they're not, noticeably tripping over something and they're not sure why they're falling. They could have memory and concentration issues. Also, more than normal fatigue, suffering complete exhaustion, trouble sleeping, mood swings, and trouble concentrating and focusing, and trouble maintaining their emotions, controlling their emotions, so they may have emotional outbursts. And if it's right after the event, they may be experiencing nausea and vomiting. You may, if you're familiar with trauma, hear those symptoms and go, well, that's what we normally say are symptoms of anybody who's gone through trauma, because of the activating the fight or flight, activating mode, activating the nervous system, being on high alert, and living in a traumatic environment, in an abusive environment, brings on those symptoms. Yes, I'm aware. They're very similar. When I read this, it caused me to pause and go, are we missing a diagnosis here? Are we saying that it's just trauma when possibly that person coming in has actually suffered a TBI and needs to follow doctor's instructions? Many within the domestic violence network, those that work at shelters, those that work directly with survivors, have been missing this diagnosis. Somebody comes in with a black eye, and people aren't being screened for head injuries, is what they're realizing, and it's getting missed. And these women, more often it's women that suffer this sort of a physical violence, and these women are going undiagnosed and they're struggling with these symptoms, and for many it can lead to further feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, and even suicide. So for yourself, if these are symptoms that you've been struggling with and you're really suffering, know that you're not alone. And I urge you to seek support and to speak to somebody that has earned your trust and confidence about this, and hopefully be able to seek some medical treatment. The way to heal a TBI, obviously a doctor would instruct you, but the most important thing is rest. I know that it's been long been said, don't sleep if you've suffered any kind of a concussion or a TBI, but I've had conversations in the last couple of years with doctors, and they've said that actually the brain actually needs a lot of rest. Yes, there are those that die from a head injury in their sleep, and they can have brain bleeds and so on. And I'm not saying totally override what your doctor says, of course, follow what they say, but rest is definitely very important for the brain in order for it to heal from any blow to it. So you need brain rest and you need physical rest. Avoiding screens is also really important because a TBI affects your vision. So having to focus on light and focus on a cell phone or a TV screen is really difficult, and that's going to just add to headache pain, and your brain isn't going to be able to rest as well. And then you slowly ease back into your activities as you feel better. And it could take a couple weeks, it could take a month or more, but healing is possible. Again, see a doctor for the instructions, but that is how you can heal from a TBI. Myself, I do believe that I experienced that in my first marriage. Another reason why I'm sharing this awareness, because I will share with you a bit of my story and how I've discovered injuries that I have that I don't remember receiving, but have actually shown up on x-rays. And these aren't just it's not an actual TBI, but further injuries around receiving a TBI. And a couple years ago, I was at the dentist just for a regular checkup. And when I was a child, I was in a really bad car accident where I broke my jaw. And on that side, which is this side where I broke my jaw, I have a wisdom tooth that has never been taken out because it sits just below the gum and it felt twisted. Probably got damaged when I broke my jaw as I was just a child. And every once in a while, the dentist likes to just check and make sure that there's no further issues happening there. And so he gave me a full head scan. It's one of those 3D scans where they can see all your skull all the way around. And as I was getting my teeth cleaned, he came in and he sat next to me. He was a very nice man and very gently said to me, you know, what happened to you, Janet? And I started answering and I said, well, you know, I broke my jaw when I was young in a car accident. And I started explaining that accident and what the injuries I incurred. And he said, no. He said, I'm not meaning that. I already know about that. But he said, what happened? And he put his hand on me and he said, really, what happened to you? And I looked at him and I thought, I have no idea what you're talking about. I said, what do you mean what happened to me? And he said, well, in the x-ray it shows up that you suffered a broken eye socket and that your teeth on this side of my face, on the lower part of the jaw, have been knocked loose at their roots due to being